are Caroline and Alan Barichievic. We're physical therapists at Barton. We are ultramarathon runners, and we'll certainly talk plenty about ultramarathons, but we do like to talk about running any distance and running anywhere. This is a picture of us actually last month. We were in Mexico and we went running, exploring. It's a way for us whenever we go somewhere to see where we're at and explore. So we just love running as a means of health and wellness and a little bit of competition on Caroline's side, not mine. But between us, we've ran over 80 ultramarathons in the last 15 years, and the experience I think we've gained about ourselves, each other, and just running in general is insurmountable. So hopefully some of that will come out in this talk and keep it somewhat entertaining for you. All right, so one of the myths I like to dispel is that running is bad for you. I love to hear, oh, my doctor said I shouldn't run anymore. Or so-and-so said I shouldn't run. It's bad for my knees, it's bad for my legs, my hips, my back. Well, what we'll try to dispel here is that it's not running in general, it's how you run that can be bad for you, and injuries that you can get from certain ways you run. And we'll go into some detail moving on to the presentation here.
Stanford University did a well-known long-term study where they took nearly 1,000 runners and non-runners, and they looked at them for 21 years. None of the participants had arthritis when the study began. Many did develop the condition over the next 20 years. The interesting part was the runners' knees were no more healthy, but they were no less healthy than the non-runners' knees. It didn't matter how much the runners ran, whether it was 200 miles versus 2,000 miles a year. And the runners had less physical disability. This is 16 years later than the non-runners, and a 39% lower mortality rate. This is out of the Archives of Internal Medicine back in 2008 when that study was done. There were more studies showing how running is good for you. The American Journal of Preventive Medicine in 2008 showed that running was not associated with greater rates of OA in the elderly runners. The current gerontology and geriatric research in October of 2012 took subsets of runners and looked at their x-rays and showed that fewer knee replacements and bone-on-bone with knee joints were there. The Medicine Science Sports Exercise study looked at some runners in July of 2013 and showed that the running significantly reduced OA and hip replacement risk. Some really good studies how running is great for you.
So distance, we talked about ultramarathon distance, which is anything greater than 26.2 miles. But when people say, oh, I want to do a 5K or a 10K, or how do you run that far? To me, distance, it's all relative. And what I like to do is show this profile. This is a 100-mile course, but it could easily be a 5K course, it could be a 10K course. What I like to focus on when I'm looking at training or where I'm going to run is, what's the topography look like? Here, we got a lot of hills. This is actually the base of Squaw Valley right there, and that's the top of Squaw Valley at the start of this particular course. But what I like to look at, I don't care what your distance is, but what does it look like? Are you going to have hills? Are you going to have flats? Are you mostly uphill course, mostly downhill course? And what that will do is influence how you need to train, and actually look at how you need to run as far as your technique goes. With running, certainly ultramarathons, there are medical and a lot of risk factors. But we see it at 5Ks, 10Ks, there are certain things that can happen. Weather, the condition you're running at, once again, the course topography. A lot of things can happen, from internal conditions, from hyponatremia, where you can get kidney failure, to just your normal aches, pains, blisters, tendinitises, knee pain, all things that can happen while you run or if you don't run correctly. One of my favorite lines is to say there are no bad conditions, only bad gear. Especially living in Tahoe. We run in blizzards, we run in rainstorms, we run in hail. It all happens. One thing I always like to tell people is, or I used to tell people, oh, stay away from cotton, cotton's bad. Well, if you run in 100-degree heat, a wet cotton shirt feels pretty darn good to cool your body off. So once again, looking at your conditions and what are the conditions today when I go run? What should I wear? Should I wear a ski hat or just a regular hat? Keeping your ears warm, keeping your head and your hands warm actually is the best way to keep your body warm. You can wear less on your body and up top if you keep your head warm and your hands warm. So all things to think about. Also, there's so many changes in gear these days. I mean, you can find every company out there makes something for running these days, especially distance running has become really popular. So how you layer. What's your first layer, your second layer? Can you take it off and easily wrap around your waist or put it in something to carry it? Better to have and not need than to need and not have. That's something I live by. So when you think about your gear, so
The Boy Scout.
the Boy Scout. So my next favorite topic is shoes. And that's probably the number one question we get in the clinic when we're in our running clinic is what kind of shoes should I wear? And if the shoe fits. If you're in a running store, you're trying on shoes, particularly running shoes, it should feel good. If it doesn't feel good in the running store, it's not going to feel good when you're out there 5, 6, 10 miles in. So a shoe should really fit well, should fit like a shoe and feel good. You can see running shoes over the last several years have gone a long, just spread out completely. The one in the center being more of what a traditional running shoe like you think of. And then the 5 fingers, the vibrant 5 fingers became very popular with the barefoot or minimalist explosion. And then of course on the other end of the spectrum right now are the Hokas, which I like to call them the marshmallow shoes. But basically their concept is that they create a sole that allows taking those impact forces off of your foot, ankle, knee, hip. And using a shoe, a sole of a shoe or material that really makes less impact on you while you're running. No matter what distance you're training for, we always try to emphasize setting a goal. 5K, 10K is one person's 5K is not a lot different than the one on the bottom of the 100 miles. I mean, it's like 96.9 miles different. But in the big scheme of things, if you're off the couch and you're training for a 5K, anyone, I believe, can train themselves to cover a distance. It really just comes down to setting that goal. How much am I going to run today? How much am I going to run tomorrow? How much am I going to recover? So setting goals is really important. When I went into the Western States, which I ran 10 days ago, this is me at mile 99 actually, and I went into it thinking, I just want to finish this year. Everyone said, what are your time? What are you going to shoot for? I just wanted to finish. I got to mile 99, I knew I was going to finish. Up to that point, anything can happen, so I don't try to put myself at that finish line before I get there. But setting goals with your running is really important. And sometimes, if you say, you know what, I'm going to train for a 10K, and you do well, you do that a couple times, then hey, you know, half marathon's not out of my reach. So setting those goals, I think, really helps motivate us to run and run further distances. So running ultras, I think why is the first question that comes to mind for most people. Why would you want to run 100 miles? I got nothing better to do. But it allows you to solve a lot of problems, I will say. But it was the same thing, setting goals. We started off running shorter ultra distance, ultra marathon distances, 50 Ks, 50 miles, were really standard distances. And it's really, I'd say, the last 10 years that the 100-mile distance has really exploded and gotten more popular. And you see a lot of people now, you have to get into a lottery to even get into these things. Before it was like, we wait till a week before a race and say, okay, I'm feeling good, body check, everything's feeling good, I'm gonna sign up for this 50-miler. Well, now it's like, okay, I gotta get online at this time, I gotta sign up, hopefully I'll get in. So running ultras has really changed. Endurance running over the last few years has really gotten popular. So go ahead and get this quick. So one thing about running ultras, and the next few slides will just kind of comment on that, you generally got to get used to starting really early in the morning. Most ultras that we do start at 4 or 5 in the morning when you start. You got to be prepared for all conditions, all types of terrain. Getting your feet wet. Learning to run with wet feet for long periods of time is definitely something we get used to. Hills. Probably 75% of our training is hill training. That look familiar, Holland? So yeah, hills.
This is mile 30 and mile 80, and it's on over 100 miles.
Yes, that's
quite fun at night.
Yes, going up 9 and it's a great hill. It's one of the better ones out there. You get used to running at night. At least I know for me, for my times for 100 milers, I pretty much always run at night. And I will say, nighttime running is the most special time. It's probably the most fun I have. Did you hear that? You've done it yourself a few times. So running at night is really special, especially when you start falling asleep on your feet and your pacer is elbowing you, telling you to wake up. Music is a great time to run with music. People ask sometimes, should I run with music, should I not? Nighttime running, cranking up music is definitely something that can help out.
You want to have a pacer that you do that so you can hear Rob. Alan came across it in Mount Lion last year.
And the big thing is, any run you do, any distance, appreciate the moment, appreciate where you are, appreciate the experience, appreciate that you can do it, appreciate that your body, you train your body, and you can run that distance. This is actually up in Washington. That is Mount Rainier in the background there. And then, of course, the Tahoe Rim Trail. We have such a great trail system here in Tahoe. If you're a runner, I know some people are primarily road runners, but the trail system here in Tahoe, even if you're a hiker, walker, I encourage everyone to get out on the Rim Trail. One thing to remember is the average elevation of the Rim Trail is 8,000 feet around the lake, and that leads into...
So a little bit about altitude training. There was a recent study done that showed that the average increase in your VO2 max after just 1 month of live high and train low, or live high and train high in elite running athletes occurred. The live high and the train low group most improved because of a higher intensity training that you can do at a lower elevation. So there's less effort with more oxygen down there, and they found that they could run farther and they could run faster. So that's why that training group had an improved performance. There needs to be a minimum of 12 hours per day for you to live in this environment, and a minimum of 2 weeks for those physiological changes to occur. By 4 weeks, the majority of adaptations have occurred, and VO2 max can decrease by 4 to 6% in just 2 weeks of inactivity, which is kind of sad. What is the optimal living altitude? Well, for greater than or equal to 22 hours a day, 2,000 to 2,500 meters, which is 6561 to 8202 feet, perfect for Tahoe, or 12 to 16 hours per day at 2,500 to 3,000 meters. There was no benefit found at altitudes greater than 3,000 meters, so nothing greater over at 9,000 feet, and no physiological adaptations took place at altitudes less than 2,000 meters. So Tahoe, truly, we are in the perfect environment for training in altitude.
Some of the things why runners don't finish runs or finish races, as we'll go into in much more detail. Heat, dehydration, my quads are shot. That comes down to your hill training, particularly downhill training. Nausea and vomiting, which goes right hand in hand with dehydration, something I've been speak very closely about. I'm completely out of gas. And what happens, these all relate to each other. When you get nausea, vomiting, your body can't consume calories. If you can't consume calories, you get no energy. You get no energy, your muscles don't work as efficiently, and you just get tired. Brain cramps. I know I had a reason to bring that in there. I think you can get a little delirious when you get out there for too long. I know any distance that can happen, especially if you get dehydrated, but I know I've had a tendency to not think very clearly when I get really tired at night.
I'm sorry for most weekend. So at mile, whatever, 80 it was, Alan had been throwing up for 45 miles at that point and stopped thinking clearly because he had no food in his body and decided that he needed to eat. And so he chose a grilled cheese sandwich full of grease and lots of good stuff at mile 80 and clearly threw it up again. And I thought, this is where I need to come in as a pacer and say, Phase 1 is ginger and saltines. Phase 2 might be the saltine crackers with some peanut butter on top. And phase 3 would be that grilled cheese sandwich. So you do clearly stop thinking about things that seem reasonable in an intelligent environment.
It is true. One thing I know we learned about running ultramarathons is you have to force yourself to eat, to get calories in. Even in your lowest moments, if you don't feel like it, your stomach's shot, getting those calories in is so important. Things definitely down the road. You see some injuries in general. Once again, we talked about the tendinitises, aches, pains, things that can come on from running particular distances. Once again, altitude problems. We're not at super high altitude here, but once again, like Caroline said, our altitude conditions here are great for training purposes. And then, of course, your conditions, running on snow. One year I was doing an ultramarathon and the first 30 miles were snow and ice, and someone actually fell and slid and broke their leg. I mean, so things can happen out there, especially when you're in the middle of nowhere. I would like to say this picture was blurry because it was so hot when Caroline was running this marathon that's how it looked, but I would find that.
It was over 100 degrees with pavement heat. It was quite fun. So, regards of running in the heat, Every 10 degrees, there's an increase, every 10-degree increase in air temperature above 55 degrees, there is a 1.5 to 3% increase in average finishing time for a marathon. So that means if your marathon time for an environment at 55 degrees is 4 hours, if it's 85 degrees, it's going to be up to 9% increase of your time. So that could be 22 minutes, so it'd be a 4-hour, 22-minute marathon time, which is considerable in the marathon world. So it really, really is important to train in heat. Heat slows us down because of dehydration. We have an increased heart rate, we have a reduced blood pressure with reduced blood flow, less fluid in our body, decreases oxygen to our muscles, and a loss of 2% body weight leads to a 4 to 6% drop in performance. So the key with heat training is to increase the body's ability to efficiently process fluids and utilize them through sweat. So what Alan and I will do, many trips that we've taken, is pick the hottest time of the day, wherever we're at, and run. We went to Las Vegas where it was 115 and ran at 2 p.m. and everyone was looking at us crazy in their air-conditioned cars, like, what are you doing? And we do that over and over so we can train in environments that you can't really train in Tahoe here. With lactic threshold, lactate basically is what makes our muscles sore. It's a byproduct of glycolysis, which is the breakdown of glucose, the food that we eat. It gives us energy. And the lactate produced is faster than it can be cleared. And that's why we get that muscle soreness. In untrained individuals, it happens at 50 to 60% of your VO2 max. And with trained individuals, it happens at 80 to 90% of your VO2 max. The VO2 max can be increased by interval training around 95% of your VO2 max, mixed with a moderate intensity of exercise around 40 to 60% of your VO2 max. It is trainable. If you're interested in testing what your VO2 max is, we just have a new setup in our analysis lab that can do that. And it's a really neat tool to take and look at where your aerobic versus anaerobic thresholds are. As an endurance athlete, when you find that anaerobic threshold, you want to really run below that so you can run for hours and hours. If you're looking for what trainable zone a fat zone is, that can also be a really good tool. DOMS. So DOMS is delayed onset muscle soreness. And it's due to high force, unaccustomed eccentric muscle contractions. There's two different types of muscle contractions. There's concentric and eccentric. So if you take your bicep muscle and you do this, that's shortening the bicep muscle, and that's a concentric contraction. When we straighten it out, that's an eccentric contraction. It's elongating that muscle. And those eccentric contractions, there's fewer motor units being contracted and utilized, so there's a higher force per area that makes us more sore. It usually begins 6 to 12 hours after exercise and peaks 2 to 3 days post-exercise. So when you run that distance of the 5K or a marathon or whatever, and you think, oh, the next day I'm actually doing pretty well, I trained really well, and then that following day comes, you're like, oh my God, I can't get out of bed. That's the DOMS. That's what I usually feel. It resolves 5 to 7 days post-exercise. The prevention for it is called a repeated bout effect. So basically, for one bout of eccentric exercise, you're going to prevent subsequent DOMS from the same exercise for 6 weeks. So we'll tell people, especially if your distance that you're training for is downhill, because that's where you do a lot of eccentric quad contraction, we'll tell people that you really need to train many weeks downhill, so you really get used to that eccentric contraction, and you don't have that breakdown too early on in your race.
Hydration. All right, so hydrating, which is important once again based on conditions and whatever distance you're running. This picture has nothing to do with hydration. I just thought it was kind of funny because it looks like the evolution of man and running. That's actually me at the bottom. I kept looking out, these guys kept kicking rocks at me. This is mile 40-ish. For some reason, we did 100K in May, and for some reason they decided to put mile 40 to 42 through a rock quarry. After this. Not that exciting. So hydration. So how to hydrate? Once again, there's 8 million products out on the market. So I brought a bunch that we just have. Oh, let's see, there's still water in there. That proves I use the thing. Okay, let's see what it is. Oh, okay. All right. It does get used. So I think most people are really familiar with water bottles, right? This has an external insulation system to it, nice small handheld bottle. Made a nice shape so it conforms to the hand. Don't really notice it's there too much. The bottles we tend to use a lot these days for longer runs, this is actually a big one of the bigger ones, it was 26 ounces, are these insulated Camelback bottles. Really nice because it has a no drip top to it, unless someone's squeezing it behind it. It's for party. But they lock also, which it makes it really nice. Once again, these nice little handheld things, because then you can really relax your arms. Let me tell you, carrying one of these things for 20-something hours will get your arms tired. So that's where another method. So the old waist belt. And I used this thing for years when I first started running ultramarathons. You stick your bottles right in the back, you reach back, you swing, put it back in there. Nice method of transporting your bottles. And then there's just the straight hydration pack. So there's a nice bladder in there. That's not the one that was leaking, I don't think. These hold generally, most of these I think come in sizes 50, 70, or 100 ounces is generally the sizes they come in for how much water you're going to want to put in there. I generally don't recommend putting sports drinks in these because they are a bear to wash, and the sports drinks get really nasty and you get this nice moldy stuff in the hoses here. So if you are going to need a sports drink, but you prefer to use one of these, I tell people to carry a small bottle with your sports drink in it, and then use your hydration bladder for just water. And then just a slightly beefier one. This one actually has a lot of cargo to it. I know for doing 100-milers, depending on the conditions and where it's at, a lot of times we'll have to carry shells and ski hats and gloves, and when it gets cold at midnight to 5 or 6 in the morning, especially at altitude, you need to have a lot of gear with you. So we'll end up carrying a lot of it through the nighttime portions of runs. With that said, water is definitely the best thing you can hydrate with. As you start going longer distances, I mean, everyone knows Gatorade. There's Heat, there's Goo2O, there's Cytomax, you can keep going on and on about sports drinks. Perpetual is one that, Perpetual is actually a little bit, that's really a distance one because it has fat, protein, and carbs in it. So if you're, the way to look at hydration drinks or sports drinks, just, you gotta try them. One thing that works well for your stomach one day may not work well the other day. So just trying them. I find that even with the sports drinks, if you water them down a lot, you're still getting those electrolytes in you, but you're not getting too overloaded with the sugar that's in them. So once again, we tend to use water primarily, and then use electrolyte capsules. You can take those, get your sodium, potassium, magnesium to help with your electrolytes. That's one thing that we've come to learn with the art of ultramarathon running is your electrolytes are everything, keeping your electrolyte system in check. Because those electrolytes are how you actually absorb the fluid into your system. Your gut needs that salt there to absorb fluid to get your muscles and stay hydrated. Wilderness. Okay, so one thing, we say backwoods and wilderness here, but this can be urban running too, knowing your environment, knowing where you're heading off into. When we say we're going for a training run, a lot of times that means 5 or 6 hours, 20 to 30 miles, and we end up back in the middle of nowhere. When we started this particular run, we're close to 9,000 feet here. It was bright and sunny when we started. Before we knew it, clouds rolled in, it started raining a little bit, and we started scurrying up pretty quickly back the last 7 miles to the car. So it is important to realize, what pack or method you take of carrying your fluids and your gear with you, so you have enough gear to protect yourself when you're out in the middle of nowhere. This is a story I think some of you have heard before, but I like to tell it because it's near and dear to both our hearts. I was running the Cascade Crest 100-mile race in Central Washington in 2007, and at mile 18, 19, I got attacked by hornets. Didn't know I was allergic to bees at the time, or hornets. About 2 miles later, I was unconscious in the middle of the trail and went into circulatory failure. And basically, that guy right there helped save my life. He stopped on the trail, and he treated me for shock, got my feet elevated, got me conscious. I felt okay, gave me some gel just to get some sugar in me, tried to get me to drink a little something. Did not knowing what was going on at the time, just that he came across an unconscious runner. Finally, after it got bad, it got worse after that. I actually started seizing and was unconscious for quite a while. I got carried out about 3 miles to an aid station and put in the ambulance. I lived. But it was really, the thing about this is this guy actually ended up finishing last, but he finished the race. He sacrificed his race to help save me. So I know that's something that, for me personally, whenever I see a runner out there, either a training run or a race, and they're having problems, I can care less about my time. I'm going to help someone out. So definitely if you're out there in the middle of nowhere, I always try to say hi to every person on the trail, be cheery, not get in people's way too much. So just something to think about out there is, don't ever take anything for granted, because I never knew I was allergic to bees at the time, and it could have been bad, but I'm still wearing ultras. So. But I do carry every bee sting allergy thing known to man. So I do generally wear something that I carry: an EpiPen, prednisone, Benadryl, you name it. I carry it all for every race I do. Favorite topic: shoes and barefoot running. So the funny thing with shoes is that we actually fell into this category of buying like 5 pairs of shoes when our shoes became discontinued. And what we've learned since then is it's really just not worth it. Okay, the material, you sit on the shelf, the material breaks down, and your shoes just don't last that long if you do that. Going back to what I said with shoes before, if the shoe fits, if you like it, buy 1, 2 pair, but don't go beyond that. I believe everyone should have 2 or 3 active pair of shoes. If you're a trail and a road runner, have 1 of each, and then go back and forth between your trail and your road running. But I think always 2 pairs at least of running shoes is important, because the material that we use to make shoes, the EVA, the foam on the bottom, actually needs to recover from running just like our bodies do. Cartilage in our bodies compresses in our knees. It actually compresses for certain distances that we run, and it takes 24 hours for it to re-expand, get that fluid back in there. Well, the EVA in running shoes is found using the same thing. It's mini cell foam, there's air cells there, and those shoes actually need to recover, and that foam actually can expand more for the cushioning.
So on that note, if you're doing 2 days on the road or on the trail, you actually need 2 road shoes or 2 trail shoes, because they haven't recovered for about 36 hours is what the research shows. So you need 4 pairs of shoes.
So the barefoot running boom of the last few years, or minimalist running, is truly, because you don't see a ton of people out there in their bare feet, but there's a few out there. It's great adjunct for anyone who runs. I think it's a great way to train once a week, to do a mile or so in your bare feet. I do it on a treadmill, usually once a week. I'll just run a mile or 2 in my bare feet. I do have 5 fingers that I like to go out and run in a little bit, just to strengthen the foot, to change the muscle activity of the foot. And the big thing, which we're going to show, is that barefoot running actually promotes a better foot strike. So once again, it's a great adjunct. But with that said, we love running shoes. I love my running shoes that I run in, and I like running in my running shoes. So once again, barefoot running, it's not for everyone, but I think it's a great adjunct for people.